She took a bullet for his twins, and the most feared crime boss in Boston realized too late that the only pure thing left in his world was bleeding in his arms. Tell me something. If life had already taken everything from you, would you still risk your last breath to save someone else's child? It was the kind of October night that crawled under your coat and settled in your bones. Clara Bennett was 25, broke grieving and halfway through another double shift, carrying a tray of sparkling water in a private club where powerful men spent more in 1 hour than she made in a month. Then one glance changed everything. This story is not just about danger power or forbidden love. It is about what happens when light walks into a world built on blood. Stay with me until the end then, like this video and comment where you're watching from. That one glance changed everything. An hour earlier, Clara Bennett had been worried about the same 3 things that ruled most of her days: rent, groceries, and whether the bus would make her late enough to lose the best section on the floor. Boston had turned mean that week. October rain came sideways off the harbor, needling through coats, leaving the sidewalks slick with old leaves and city grime. Clara stood at the corner of Hanover and Cross with a cracked umbrella in one hand and a dented travel mug in the other, watching headlights smear across the wet street like paint. Her shoes had taken on water 10 minutes ago. Her feet were numb. Her phone screen showed 2 missed calls from a number she knew too well. Landlord? She turned the phone face down and shoved it back into her pocket. The city around her kept moving in that hard, indifferent way cities do. Delivery trucks groaned. A siren passed somewhere downtown. A man in a wool coat hurried by without looking up. The bakery across the street was just pulling cinnamon rolls from the oven, and for 1 sharp second the smell hit her so hard it almost bent her in half. Her father had owned a bakery once, a tiny place in Dorchester with a faded blue sign and a front window that fogged every winter morning. Clara used to stand on a milk crate at dawn and watch him braid challah dough with flour up to his elbows while her mother laughed at the radio. Back then, the world had felt smaller, kinder, something you could fix with patience and warm bread. Then came debt. Then came late notices. Then came men with expensive watches and patient voices. Then came the day her father kissed her forehead, told her to be good for her mother, and never came back. The state called it suicide. Clara had spent 9 years learning how to function around that word without believing it. Now her mother was gone too. 3 months earlier, after weeks of fluorescent hospital corridors, clipped doctor voices, and paperwork that kept multiplying no matter how much she cried over it. Liver failure, the official form said. Complications said one line. Final balance due said another. Clara worked double shifts because grief did not stop utility bills. It did not care that some mornings she still reached for her phone to call her mother and tell her something stupid about the weather or the bus or the woman downstairs who sang to her cat at midnight. Grief just sat where love used to sit and asked whether she planned to keep going. She always did, because there was no one left to catch her if she did not. Velvet House stood on a narrow side street in the financial district, hidden behind smoked glass and a matte black door that gave away nothing. It was not the kind of place with a sign big enough for tourists. It did not need one. The right people knew where it was. The rest learned from rumor and envy. Inside, everything gleamed low and expensive. Black walnut walls, amber sconces, brass railings polished to a warm glow. A stage downstairs for jazz trios and private performances. A second-floor balcony reserved for politicians, athletes, judges, and men whose names stayed out of public records unless something went very wrong. Clara clocked in 12 minutes late and caught the look from floor management before the words came. "You're cutting it close again." Derek Mays stood near the host stand, thin tie. 2 white teeth, a voice that always sounded like it had been trained on customer complaints and contempt. He looked Clara up and down as she stripped off her raincoat. "The bus broke down," she said. "The bus is not my problem." "No," Clara said, tying her apron. "I know exactly whose problem I am." His mouth tightened. He either missed the line or understood it and hated that she had landed it without raising her voice. "The upper balcony is closed for private service tonight. You and Naomi are rotating. Keep the glasses full. Keep your head down. No conversation unless invited." "Understood." "And Clara," he added, lowering his voice, "these guests are not the kind you smile at unless they smile first." She glanced past him toward the room already filling with polished shoes, watches that cost more than her yearly rent. Women in liquid silk, men in perfect suits. That only narrows it down to everyone here. Naomi snorted from the service station. Derek gave them both a warning look and walked off. Naomi leaned closer. "He's been sweating since 6. Whoever booked upstairs has him acting like he owes them money." "In this city," Clara said, stacking crystal flutes onto her tray, "that probably means he does." The first 2 hours passed the way service always did at places like Velvet House, all motion and memory. Pour, clear, smile, move. Clara wove through tables on instinct, catching fragments of the lives wealthy people performed in public. A woman in emerald satin whispering to a state senator with her hand on his wrist. A venture capitalist complaining about shipping costs over oysters flown in that morning. A retired hockey player taking selfies with women half his age. A judge laughing too loudly at a joke that was not funny. A man in a navy suit slipping an envelope to another man beside the coat check, both of them smiling like they had never committed a sin in daylight. By 8 o'clock, the room had changed. It happened the way weather changes, not all at once, but enough for your skin to notice before your mind catches up. Conversations dipped. Staff straightened. Security shifted position near the staircase leading to the private balcony. Even Derek stopped pretending to breathe normally. Then the door opened. 6 men entered, first clean suits and predator eyes taking in exits, shadows, hands. Their attention moved like a blade across the room, and in the middle of them walked Declan Cane. Clara had seen his face before on local news, usually behind phrases like "ongoing investigation, alleged ties," and "no comment from counsel." In person, he looked less like a businessman than a man everyone else had learned to orbit. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark suit cut close through the chest. No unnecessary movement anywhere in him. His face had the kind of stillness people mistake for calm when it is really control. And on his left side, holding his hand, was a little boy. That was what stopped her. The child could not have been more than 5. Dark hair, miniature blazer, untied shoe. A bright red action figure clutched in his free hand. In Declan's other arm slept a girl in a white cardigan, cheek pressed to his shoulder, one small fist still tangled in the ear of a stuffed rabbit. The room made room for him without being told. People nodded, murmured, averted their eyes at the exact right moment. Power did not need introductions here, it simply arrived. Derek hissed from behind Clara's shoulder. "Balcony, water service, now!" She moved before her thoughts did, tray steady in both hands. Up the curved staircase, past the 2 security men at the top who patted her apron and checked beneath the tray. The private balcony looked down over the main room like a private box in an opera house, except no one there had come for music. Declan took the head chair at a long mahogany table. The twins settled beside him. His men remained standing along the perimeter, backs half turned to the room, always watching. Clara approached with the water. Up close, Declan looked tired. Not weak, not distracted, just tired in a way that felt bone deep. There was a line between his brows that had not come from tonight. He kept one hand on his phone and one on the little girl's blanket, adjusting it when it slipped from her shoulder. "Sparkling," Clara said softly, setting a flute near his right hand. He did not look at her. "Not yet." The boy, restless in the way little boys are, leaned too far beneath the table and his action figure slipped from his grip. It bounced once against Clara's shoe. One of the men at the wall moved instantly, hand-brushing inside his jacket. Clara crouched before the tension could sharpen. She picked up the toy, brushed a speck of dust from its cape, and held it out. "He survived the fall," she said. The boy took it with total solemnity. "Turbo always gets back up?" Then he's smarter than most adults. The girl blinked awake at the sound of voices, large gray eyes taking Clara in with careful seriousness. The little boy grinned. For the first time, Declan looked up. It was not a casual glance. It landed on her and stayed. Clara felt it in her throat before she felt it anywhere else. His eyes were a pale, difficult blue, the kind that looked almost colorless in low light. "What is your name?" "Clara, sir." "You're not nervous, Clara." She could have lied. She was nervous. Any sane person would have been. But she was also cold-tired and one bounced rent payment away from having her things thrown onto a sidewalk. There was only so much fear left to spend. "I'm more afraid of spilling water on your suit than I am of anything else in this room." One of the men behind him almost smiled. Declan's mouth did not move, but something changed in his eyes, a flicker of interest where there had only been assessment before. "Bring the children pasta," he said. "Plain butter for her, extra parmesan for him." Clara nodded and turned toward the service stair. That should have been the end of it. In some lives, maybe it would have been. She was halfway back to the balcony with 2 shallow bowls balanced on a tray when she noticed the mirrored panel behind the private bar catch a shape moving where no one should have been. A service door. Opening. A man in waiter whites. Wrong shoulders, wrong gait, wrong eyes, and the gun in his hand. The rest had happened so fast it lived in Clara afterward, as fragments, not sequence. The angle of the barrel. The boy's face turning toward her. Her own voice ripping out of her before she knew what she was shouting. The hard impact of the first bullet punching through her shoulder with so much force it spun the room sideways. The second tearing into her ribs and emptying the air from her lungs. The sound of crystal breaking. Pasta across the floor. Children screaming. Heat, then cold, then noise so loud it seemed to come from underwater. By the time Declan dragged her behind the overturned table, she could not feel her right hand. He was saying something to her. The words came in sharp bursts. "Look at me. Stay with me. Open your eyes." She tried to focus. His face was above hers, streaked with blood she dimly understood was hers. The little boy was crying somewhere nearby. The girl was making tiny, frightened sounds that somehow hurt Clara more than the bullets had. "Are they okay?" she managed. Declan looked toward his children, then back down at her. "They're alive." Good, she thought. Then darkness rolled over the edge of everything. She came back in pieces, leather beneath her cheek. An engine. Rain slamming against glass. Someone shouting into a phone. Pain so bright it had color. She tried to breathe, and the motion dragged fire through her side. "Easy," a rough male voice said from somewhere near her feet. Declan's voice cut through it low and violent. "Drive faster. We'll kill her if I hit the bridge at that speed. If she dies in my car, you're next." Clara forced one eye open. Streetlights strobed through tinted windows. Her head was in Declan's lap. His hand was pressed against her side, another gripping her shoulder hard enough to stem the bleeding. He looked less like a man now than a force barely contained inside one. She tried to speak. He bent low as if the effort itself offended him. "My rent," she whispered. For one strange second he simply stared at her. Then against the panic and blood and speed a humorless breath escaped him. "You are about 3 breaths from death and thinking about rent." "I said Tuesday. You'll make Tuesday." She wanted to ask how he knew. Wanted to ask where they were going, whether the children were with them, whether this was the part where people like him collected debts no one could repay. Instead, the pain peeled her under again. When she woke next, the room was dim and warm. Not hospital bright, not public. Heavy curtains, dark wood, firelight moving over carved walls. Her whole body felt wrapped in lead. She tried to turn, and something deep in her side tore enough to pull a sound from her throat. "Stay still." The voice came from near the windows. Declan stepped out of the shadows, jacket gone, shirt sleeves, rolled collar open. Without the public armor of the club, he looked harder, somehow more dangerous because there was no performance left in him. A silver-haired doctor rose from a chair beside the bed and adjusted the monitor at her side. "You were lucky," the doctor said. The shoulder wound passed through. The lower shot nicked the liver. Another inch and this conversation would not be happening. Clara swallowed against the dry ache in her throat. "This a hospital?" "No," Declan said. "Hospitals can be reached." The doctor poured water, helped her sit a fraction higher, and let her take 2 careful sips. "Julian Vale," he said. "I prefer patients who do not arrive carried in by furious men at 2 in the morning." Clara's eyes moved to Declan, the twins, sleeping. Relief loosened something in her chest. It hurt. The doctor gathered gauze wrappers from a tray. "Try not to move. Try not to argue. And if you must make bad decisions, at least wait until the stitches hold." After he left, silence spread through the room like a second set of walls. Clara was the one who broke it. "Where am I?" "One of my houses." "That tells me nothing." "It is not meant to." She looked at him, really looked. He had not slept. There was dried blood along the edge of his cuff, one small cut at his temple. His face had that sealed quality grief gives men who learned young not to let it show where anyone could use it against them. Am I under guard? Yes. Am I a guest or a hostage? His jaw shifted once. That depends. On what? On whether what happened upstairs was chance courage or theater. For a beat, she did not understand him. Then she did, and the disbelief that hit her was so pure it almost pushed past the pain. You think I planned that? I think a shooter got through a controlled environment with inside knowledge. I think you reacted before trained men did. I think 2 bullets nearly killed you, and I still do not know who told him where my children would be. Clara stared at him. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar smoke. Somewhere beyond the walls, wind moved off the ocean. She had saved his children, and he was interrogating her before the blood had dried. She laughed once, and it came out rough and ugly. That is unbelievable. It is practical. No, she said, forcing herself a little higher against the pillows despite the pain. Practical is buying store-brand cereal because your electric bill is due. Practical is working a double shift with a fever because there's no one else to pay for antibiotics. Practical is not throwing yourself in front of bullets for children you have never met. That part was not practical. It was human. His gaze did not move from hers. You do not get to turn that into one more transaction because that's how your world works. A muscle in his cheek jumped. My world survives because I assume the worst, and mine survives because I can still tell the difference between a child and a target. The silence that followed had weight. He was looking for something she could tell. A slip, a lie, a performance crack. Whatever he expected to find, he did not. At last he said, quiet arrest. I want to go home. You cannot. Watch me. If you leave this house tonight, you will not make it to the end of the driveway. The certainty in his tone took the fight out of her for one dangerous second because it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like fact. He turned toward the door. Your landlord, he said without looking back, will not bother you this week. Then he was gone. The first days blurred. Pain medication turned hours soft around the edges. Clara slept, woke, slept again. Sometimes she came up to consciousness enough to hear the house around her. Deep footsteps in the hall. A woman somewhere downstairs directing staff in a low, efficient voice. The crackle of a fire. Once the sound of a child laughing quick and bright before someone shushed him. On the second morning she woke to find a red action figure beside her pillow. Turbo. She held it in her left hand and stared until her vision burned. On the third afternoon, a man the size of a refrigerator brought in a tray with soup toast and a file folder thick enough to break a wrist. He had a broken nose and the flattened calm of someone who had learned long ago not to announce danger, because danger already knew where to find him. Eat, he said, setting the tray down. I'm not hungry. Boss says eat. And if I say no, then I come back in 10 minutes and annoy you again. I am very committed when properly motivated. Despite herself, Clara almost smiled. You have a name? Gabe Mercer. She looked at the folder. What's that? Your life. Her stomach tightened. Comforting. He shrugged. Depends what's in it. When he left, she opened the file with fingers that did not feel steady enough for what followed. Her birth certificate. School transcripts. Work history. Her mother's hospital balance. Past addresses. A bank statement that made her want to disappear. Then a police report. Martin Bennett, 41. Owner of Bennett Bread and Coffee. Cause of death drowning. Manner of death suicide. A smaller report, clipped behind it, listed unpaid private loans attached to the bakery expansion in the final year before he died. Collection references. Names she did not know. One repeated twice. Joseph Renza. Clara's vision went white at the edges. The room tilted not from pain this time, but from an old wound splitting back open beneath her ribs. She had asked questions at 17, at 20, at 23 after one too many drinks and a grief that came out mean. Nobody had ever given her more than shrugs and paperwork. Now a man like Declan Cane could pull her life into a neat folder in 48 hours. The unfairness of it made her shake. The door opened before she could decide whether to cry or throw something. Gabe came back, took one look at her face, and closed the door behind him. You found the part that matters. She held up the report. Who was he? Low-level collector, Providence side. Worked under the Shaw crew for a while, not ours. All the same poison. Maybe Gabe said, maybe not. My father was a baker. His expression did not change, but something in it lowered half an inch from professional distance to plain human recognition. I know. He borrowed money to keep that place alive. That's what people do when they're drowning. They borrow another breath. Her voice sharpened despite the weakness in it. And some man with a nice watch decided my family was worth more dead than late on payments. Gabe did not answer right away. Finally, he said, "Boss had me dig because he wanted to know if somebody could use your history against you. That's all." "Does he know?" "Yes." Clara looked down at the page in her hand. "Get out." He nodded once and left. The person who came in next was Declan. He paused just inside the room, eyes moving from the file in her lap to the tear she had not realized was halfway down her face. "Gabe talks too much. He talked less than your paperwork did." Declan crossed to the chair by the bed and sat forearms on his knees, watching her with that same unreadable focus he seemed to bring to every room. "My father had flour under his nails," Clara said, still looking at the report because she could not bear to look at him. "Even at dinner, he used to say bread tells on you. He would come home smelling like yeast and sugar and burnt crust, and my mother would complain and kiss him anyway." She swallowed. Then, one year the oven failed. Then the supplier raised prices. Then he borrowed money. Then one winter he started keeping aspirin in the glove box and calling it a headache. 3 months later they pulled him out of the harbor. Declan said nothing, maybe because there was nothing respectable to say. At last he said, "I am sorry about your father." She let out a weak breath that almost passed for a laugh. "You say that like the apology belongs to weather." "No." His voice was quiet. "I say it because some men deserve a grave and some deserve a reckoning." She turned then. "And which kind are you?" He held her gaze. "That depends who is asking." Before she could answer, 2 small bodies slipped through the half-open door with the stealth of children who had absolutely been told not to enter. "Can we come in now?" Evan stood on the threshold with Turbo clutched to his chest. Ella half hid behind him, rabbit in one hand. Serious eyes fixed on Clara, as if measuring whether she was fragile enough to break. Everything in Clara softened against her will. Declan rose. "I said later." "You said maybe Evan corrected." Ella stepped around him and approached the bed on quiet feet. "You were sleeping." "I was," Clara said. "Are you still shot?" The question was so solemn it nearly undid her. "A little." Evan came to the other side and placed Turbo carefully beside her hand like a ceremonial offering. "He helps," I noticed. He looked at the bandage visible above the blanket and frowned with all the gravity of a child facing a problem too large for his size. "Did it hurt?" "Yes." Ella's lower lip pulled in for 1 second, then disappeared. "I don't like guns." "No," Clara said gently. "You shouldn't." Declan stood at the foot of the bed, silent, watching. Clara could feel at the shift he had not admitted even to himself. Not trust, not fully, but fracture. The children were proof against 1,000 suspicions because they knew instinct before adults remembered how. Evan had launched himself at the bedside of the woman who had covered him with her own body. Ella had brought the rabbit she did not let anyone else touch. Children did not fake the direction of their fear. Evan leaned closer. "Daddy said you saved us." Clara met his bright dark eyes. "I moved fast. That's all." "That's not all," he said. Declan's expression changed at that. Small, almost invisible, but there. Something unarmored. A woman appeared in the doorway. Then, elegant in a charcoal dress, clearly the house manager. By the way, she radiated competence and control. "Children, we're leaving," Evan said immediately, which meant he had no intention of leaving. Ella reached out and touched Clara's left hand with 2 light fingers. "You can keep Bunny tonight." The rabbit was tucked under her arm. Clara blinked. "That's very generous." Ella thought for a moment, then corrected herself. "You can borrow her." "Then I'm honored." The children were herded out with promises of lunch and the threat of missing dessert. Silence settled after them, warm in the place where grief had been cold only moments earlier. Declan remained by the bed. "They do not take to strangers," he said. Clara looked at the door the twins had vanished through. "Maybe they're just smarter than adults." His mouth almost moved. She drew in a careful breath. "I still want to leave." "I know, but I understand the part where somebody might try again." "Yes, if I stay until you figure out who wanted your children dead, I'm not staying as a prisoner." He listened without interrupting. "I want a phone. I want updates on what you're doing with that investigation. And I'm not taking money I did not earn. You nearly died. I also have dignity. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than necessary. "You will have the phone. You will have information within reason. And if staying here offends your sense of independence, then you can work while you recover." She blinked. Work at what? A faint line appeared beside his mouth. Not quite amusement, not quite challenge. "You kept talking about practical things. Let's see how practical you are." Clara looked back at the open file on her lap, at the old report that had managed to wound her twice, once when she was 17 and again now. Then she looked toward the hall where the twins had gone, where the echo of their voices still seemed to hang in the air like light. Outside the window's rain pressed itself against the glass and slid down in silver streaks. Somewhere below, the ocean kept striking rock with steady force, patient enough to shape stone. "All right," she said. Declan nodded once, and when he turned toward the door, he did not look like a man who had solved a problem. He looked like a man who had let one into the house and could already feel the structure shifting around it. The next morning, the house showed Clara its true size. Until then, pain and fever had shrunk everything to one bedroom, one doorway, one man with cold eyes and careful hands he did not seem to trust. But once the medication fog lifted and the rain broke over the coast, she could see where she had been taken. The Cane estate did not feel like a home at first. It felt like a fortress pretending to be elegant. From her bedroom window, she saw gray Atlantic water hurling itself against black rocks below the cliffs. The main house sat back from the edge behind stone terraces, iron gates and clipped hedges that looked decorative until she noticed the cameras hidden among them. Men walked the perimeter in dark jackets, moving with the loose attention of people trained to notice what did not belong. Even the driveway curved in a way that made a straight approach impossible. Beauty, Clara thought, could be built to keep people out just as easily as it could invite them in. By noon, she had ignored Dr. Vale's orders twice, annoyed the house staff once, and made it all the way to the second-floor landing before Gabe caught her with one hand braced against the banister. "You planning to bleed on the marble?" he asked. "I'm taking a walk. You're pale." "I'm pale all the time." He glanced at the hand she kept pressed against her ribs. "You're also stubborn all the time. That one's genetic." He considered that, then shifted his weight. 5 minutes, then back to bed before Vale starts using my skull as a lecture tool. Clara gave him a look. "You say that like it's happened." "Twice." He walked beside her as she moved down the hallway, slow and irritated by the slowness. The estate was quieter than she expected for a place filled with staff children and armed men. Most sounds seemed swallowed by thick carpets, high ceilings, old wood. Portraits in heavy frames watched from the walls. The scent of beeswax, polished oak, and distant sea air drifted through the place like a permanent season. At the end of the corridor, one set of French doors stood open to a small sitting room lined with books. Sunlight had finally broken through the cloud cover, laying pale gold across the floorboards. In the middle of that light, Evan and Ella sat on a rug surrounded by blocks, crayons, and the kind of serious concentration children treat as life or death. Ella looked up first. "She escaped," she announced. Evan turned, saw Clara, and scrambled to his feet so fast he knocked over a tower of blue blocks. "You're walking." "Against medical advice," Clara said. Gabe sighed from behind her. "I'm already regretting this." Evan came straight over and took her hand with complete confidence, as if he had known her for years instead of days. His fingers were warm and sticky with something sweet. "You missed breakfast," he said. "That sounds like an accusation." "It is. There were waffles." Clara pressed a hand to her chest. "That is serious." Ella had gone back to her block structure, but was watching Clara from beneath a fall of dark hair. The little girl's reserve was different from fear. It felt older than that, like she had learned too early that the world could change shape without warning and preferred to study people before giving them a place inside it. Gabe checked the hallway, checked the windows, checked his watch. 5 minutes. "You keep saying that," Clara replied, "because you keep ignoring it." The room itself had a softness the rest of the house lacked. Low shelves filled with books, wooden trains, puzzles, and battered stuffed animals. A child-sized table near the windows with paper spread across it in careful chaos. Someone had tried very hard to carve out one bright corner from a world built on caution. "Do you want to see the fort?" Evan asked. "There's a fort." He pointed to a cluster of chairs near the fireplace draped with blankets and cushions. No girls allowed. Ella looked up flatly. I'm in it all the time. That's because you're Ella, he said, as though that explained the legal exception. Clara smiled despite herself. Then I assume I need clearance? Evan narrowed his eyes as if weighing her. Maybe. Harsh, she said. Gabe made a rough sound that might have been a laugh, or possibly a warning. With him, it was hard to tell. Clara lowered herself carefully onto the rug and immediately understood the danger children presented. Not the obvious kind. The worst kind. The kind that reached into places adults kept protected and made them ache. Evan resumed rebuilding his block tower with fierce determination. Ella slid a box of crayons toward Clara without comment. Inside, several had been peeled bare of their wrappers. One blue stub was snapped clean in two. The rabbit sat nearby, propped against a pillow like a silent supervisor. You can color, Ella said. I'm honored. She picked up a green crayon and looked at the blank paper. The last time she had done something this simple without thinking about bills or shifts or medication schedules, her mother had still been alive. Evan stacked 2 crooked levels and sat back to admire them. Daddy says I have engineering instincts. Daddy says that because he doesn't want to say you make a mess, Gabe muttered from the doorway. Evan beamed. I do both. Clara laughed softly and bent over the paper. The sound surprised her. It had been a while since laughter came without effort. For the next half hour, the room narrowed to crayons blocks and the kind of conversation that moved on pure instinct. Evan informed her that Turbo had once fallen into a toilet and survived. Ella said this was because boys made bad choices. Clara was asked whether she liked dinosaurs' pancakes or storms in that order. She answered all 3 with the seriousness such questions deserved. She learned that Ella hated loud clapping, but loved the smell of vanilla. That Evan liked to wear mismatched socks because only boring people match on purpose. That both children still woke at night when the wind rattled the windows too hard. It was in the quiet pauses, the moments between one question and the next, that Clara noticed the shadows still living behind their eyes. Ella checked doorways. Evan glanced at every sudden sound. They were brave children. They were still frightened children. At some point, the doorway darkened. Clara looked up and found Declan leaning one shoulder against the frame jacket-off tie gone, as if he had come in from business only to stop short at what he saw. His twins on the rug. Clara in the middle of them with a green crayon in hand and a half-finished drawing of a dragon wearing a crown. For a second, no one spoke. Then Evan held up a block. She says this is not structurally sound. Declan's gaze moved to Clara. It is a lawsuit waiting to happen. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter, more dangerous, because it felt unpracticed. Then by all means, he said, stepping into the room, save the architecture. The children swarmed him the way children do with fathers they love, even when those fathers are made of weather and sharp edges. Evan launched himself at Declan's side. Ella stood and waited. Declan crouched without hesitation and opened one arm wide enough for both. Clara looked away. It felt too intimate somehow, not because it was romantic, but because it was real. Real enough to make the contradictions of him harder to manage. He was a man with armed guards outside every window. He was also the man adjusting Ella's cardigan with absent care while Evan explained block stability in breathless detail. Clara had grown up hearing one thing about men like him. Sharks in suits. Predators with polished manners and blood under their nails. She had believed it because belief had cost her nothing. Her father had died under the pressure of borrowed money and patient threats. Her mother had spent the rest of her life pretending rage was not a second grief laid over the first. And yet here was Declan Cane kneeling on a nursery rug, listening to his son explain why all towers were stronger with dinosaurs on top. Some truths Clara was learning were not simple enough to be useful. Later that afternoon, once she had been bullied back upstairs and bullied again into finishing broth and dry toast, a woman named Mrs. Lang arrived to introduce herself properly. She ran the house with a level of competence that made everything around her seem just slightly less impossible. You are not staff, Mrs. Lang said, as she adjusted fresh flowers near the windows. You are also not a prisoner, despite the atmosphere certain men mistake for hospitality. That is a very diplomatic sentence. It has been cultivated over years of surviving powerful people in enclosed spaces. Clara liked her immediately. Mrs. Lang's hair was silver at the temples, her posture immaculate, her expression 1/2 inch away from amusement at all times. She brought Clara a stack of folded clothes that were soft expensive and very much not hers. "I cannot wear these." "You can, and you will. The alternatives are your blood-stained uniform and whatever passed for laundry in your apartment, which I have not seen but have already judged." Clara blinked. "My apartment? Your essentials were collected yesterday." "Collected by who?" "Men who frightened your landlord into discovering a moral conscience." Clara shut her eyes for one dangerous second. Of course they did. Mrs. Lang softened slightly. "Miss Bennett, if you are going to survive this household, learn to separate help from humiliation. It will save you energy." After she left, Clara sat with that sentence longer than she wanted to admit. By the end of the week, the house settled around her in pieces. Not fully, never that easily, but enough for routine to form. Breakfast came on trays when Vale still insisted she should not take stairs alone. Gabe checked every hallway before the twins were let loose on the first floor. Declan disappeared into the city for hours at a time and returned carrying cold weather and silence into every room. Staff moved with practiced efficiency. Phones rang behind closed office doors. Cars rolled in and out through the front gates at all hours. Clara watched. That was one of the few skills grief had sharpened in her. When life stripped you of certainty, observation became a form of control, so she noticed things. Which bodyguards spoke least and saw most, which calls made Declan's tone flatten into something dangerous, which names caused a pause before being answered, and which man moved through the estate as if he belonged to it in a way the others did not. Adrian Shaw. Declan's second-in-command looked wrong in a way she could not yet prove. Not obvious wrong. He was too polished for that. Too smooth. He dressed like wealth that had never seen consequence, and spoke in a voice designed for boardrooms, memorial services, and quiet threats. He was handsome, in a careful way, all angles and tailored restraint with eyes the color of old coins. Everyone deferred to him. No one relaxed around him. The first time Clara found him alone, she had wandered downstairs farther than Gabe liked and followed the sound of rain striking glass into the library. It was a magnificent room, floor-to-ceiling shelves, dark walnut, a ladder on rails, windows overlooking the sea. A fire burned low in the hearth. Ledger's folders and a laptop sat open on the large desk in the center. Adrian was standing by the shelves holding a crystal glass and reading something on his phone. He looked up when she entered. "You move quietly for someone recovering from gunshot wounds. You stand in other people's libraries like a villain in a movie." His eyes flicked over her once measuring interested but not warm. "I've heard you're sharper than you look." Clara glanced at the glass in his hand. "I imagine that's how people survive around here." A smile touched his mouth. It did not reach his eyes. "Declan seems to enjoy your company. Does that bother you?" "Very little bothers me," Adrian said. That more than the answer itself made her uneasy. Before she could respond, Declan entered from the hallway, and the room changed in a way that had nothing to do with volume. Adrian's posture remained smooth. Declan's expression remained unreadable. Yet something tightened between them like wire pulled too fast. "You need something?" Adrian asked. Declan looked at Clara first. "I was told my patient had escaped. I'm beginning to think nobody here understands the difference between walking and escaping." "Given your recent history," he said dryly, "I find caution reasonable." Adrian set his glass down. "I'll leave you to it." He passed Clara on the way out, offering the faintest incline of his head. She caught a trace of bergamot and expensive cologne and something colder beneath it, like a room that had never been warmed by people even when full. When the door shut behind him, Clara let out the breath she had not realized she was holding. "Your friend is unsettling." Declan crossed to the desk. "He is not my friend." "Good. Then I'm not imagining it." He looked up. "Imagining what?" "That every time he smiles, it feels like he's already decided how a room ends." For one long beat, Declan said nothing. Then he tapped the stack of folders on the desk. "Sit." Clara frowned. "That sounds alarmingly like an order." "It is an opportunity." She lowered herself into the leather chair opposite him with a care she hated needing. On the desk sat ledgers from several of his legal companies, shipping, construction, waterfront storage, property management. The pages were marked with sticky tabs and notes in different hands. "You said you wouldn't take money you hadn't earned," Declan said. "So earn it." Clara stared at the paperwork. "What exactly am I looking for?" "The places I am being robbed politely. I thought men like you called that business. Only when I approve of it." He slid the laptop toward her. Rows of numbers filled the screen. At first it looked impossible. Too much data, too many names, too many transactions flowing through too many companies with legitimate fronts and layered ownership. But numbers were a language Clara had spoken under pressure for years. Not at this scale, no. But scarcity taught pattern recognition fast. She began where she knew. Recurring costs, inflated invoices, freight weights that did not match supply claims, duplicate service fees. 2 hours later, the room had gone dark enough that Declan had lit the desk lamp without her noticing. She sat forward, one hand braced against the edge of the desk hair slipping from its clip, while she traced a line across a set of shipping entries. These numbers are wrong. Declan looked up from his phone. How wrong? She turned the screen toward him. The steel shipments for this waterfront redevelopment project are being billed at one grade and delivered at another. Weight does not match invoice value. Someone's skimming the difference every month. He moved around the desk and leaned beside her chair close enough for her to catch cedar smoke and rain on his coat. His hand braced against the leather back heat collecting at her shoulder in a way she refused to notice for longer than necessary. Who manages transport on that project, she asked. His eyes narrowed as he read the company name. My cousin Warren. Well, Clara said then, Warren is either stupid or greedy. A low sound left Declan almost a laugh, almost something softer. In my family, there is often no daylight between the two. She tilted her head back to look at him. That was almost charming. That was a warning. About the family or the accounting. Yes, the silence that followed felt different from the others they had shared. Not hostile, not cautious, a little too aware. Clara looked back at the spreadsheets first. Over the following days, the library became her place. Not because it was safe. Nothing in that house was fully safe. But because there she could build usefulness, and usefulness was one of the few currencies that kept a person from feeling helpless. She worked mornings after breakfast, afternoons when the twins napped, evenings when the estate quieted enough for numbers to speak clearly. She found more than one leak. A Shell subcontractor overbilling through a donor account tied to one of Declan's charitable boards. Inventory padding across a storage yard in Southie. Insurance irregularities that looked too neat to be mistakes. Each time she brought one to Declan, he listened. Not indulgently, seriously. That mattered more than she wanted it to. The twins made themselves at home around her work as if a woman with spreadsheets had always belonged to the house. Evan would burst into the library carrying Turbo and announce he had come to supervise. Ella preferred to sit cross-legged by the fire and draw in silence, glancing up now and then as if making sure Clara had not vanished between pages. One rainy evening, Evan sprawled across the rug building a racetrack from books while Ella colored beside the hearth. Clara was halfway through a set of invoices when Gabe appeared at the door and muttered, "Boss is back." There was no reason those words should have changed the room. They did. Declan entered loosened tie, damp overcoat. Exhaustion held in hard, clean lines. His gaze found the children first, then Clara at the desk, then the ledgers spread open in front of her. "You're still working. You're still bleeding money," she said without looking up. Gabe made a rough approving sound and withdrew before either of them could hand him a job. Declan crossed to the desk. "That bad." She turned one page around. "Worse if you care about the foundation attached to your family name." His expression sharpened. "The Shell contractor on the Camden housing grant is routing inflated expenses through a donor account tied to your children's fund." The children, hearing none of the adult meaning but their own names, looked up immediately. "My fund?" Evan asked. Ella frowned. "What's a donor?" Clara softened her tone at once. "Boring grown-up stuff." Declan's eyes stayed on the paper. "Who signs off on that board?" She pointed to the line. "Adrian Shaw." The room went very quiet. Declan's face did not change much. It did not need to. The stillness itself deepened. "Could be oversight," Clara said carefully. "Could be." But neither of them quite believed it. Evan crawled over and leaned on Clara's knee. "Are you mad?" She looked down. "Not at you." He seemed to accept that. Ella did not. Ella studied Declan with a child's unsettling accuracy. "You get colder when you're angry," she said. Something inside Clara twisted. Declan blinked once, then crouched to Ella's level. "Do I?" "Yes." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind his daughter's ear with a gentleness so careful it felt like apology. "Then perhaps I should warm up." He stood again and looked at Clara over the children's heads. There was gratitude in his face this time, though not the kind men like him said out loud. Later that night, after the twins had been taken upstairs and the library had thinned down to lamplight, fire glow, and the steady striking of rain against the windows, Clara closed the last folder and rubbed her eyes. "You'll go blind doing that," Declan said from the decanter table. "Excellent. Then I won't have to read any more fake invoices." He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass and after a pause a much smaller amount into another. He brought one to her. "I shouldn't. You won't sleep. That is not exactly a medical recommendation." "No," he said, settling against the edge of the desk. "It is an observation." Clara took the glass. The first sip burned warm all the way down. Outside, the sea beat steadily against the cliffside below the estate patient, and relentless. Inside, the fire snapped softly. It would have been peaceful if not for the fact that peace around him never came without edges. Declan looked at her over the rim of his glass. "Why did you really do it?" She frowned. "We have already had this argument." "No, we had the practical version." His voice lowered. "I'm asking for the truth." Clara stared into the amber in her glass. For a long time she said nothing. Then, softly, "When I was 10, my father let me stay at the bakery past midnight because a storm knocked out power in half the neighborhood and he wanted to move whatever dough could still be saved. I remember sitting on a flour sack while rain hit the front windows and thinking there was no place safer than where he was." She swallowed. "Years later, when he started falling apart, I kept waiting for the adult in the room to fix it. Some banker, some friend, some law, someone. No one did." Declan did not interrupt. "So when I saw the gun pointed at your son," she said, looking up at last, "it wasn't complicated. A child should not find out in 1 second that grown people will stand there and let the world take everything." His jaw tightened once. "That is not something a person forgets." "No," she said. "It isn't." For a beat, neither of them moved. Then Declan reached out, and with the back of one finger traced the line where the scar disappeared beneath her collarbone. The touch was so light it should not have mattered. It did. Every nerve in her body seemed to notice at once. "You almost died because my world touched yours," he said. Clara's breath caught shallow and sharp. "And yours was already dangerous long before I arrived," she answered. Their eyes held. Too long. Too honestly. The library door opened. Adrian stood there, one hand still on the brass handle, the polite apology already prepared on his face. "I didn't realize I was interrupting." The warmth shattered so quickly Clara almost doubted it had existed. Declan stepped back. "We were reviewing accounts," of course, Adrian said. His gaze moved once between them and stored whatever he saw. Then he said, "The Harbor Children's Gala is on Friday. The mayor will be there. Half the city's donors judges and respectable criminals too, given the recent rumors your appearance matters." Declan's voice had gone flat again. "I know the schedule." Adrian's eyes shifted to Clara. "You should bring her." The fire snapped between them. Clara felt it then, sudden and certain like cold water finding a crack in stone. Something inside this family was not merely strained. It was rotting from somewhere close to the center. Something inside this family was not merely strained. It was rotting from somewhere close to the center. Clara did not say it aloud. She did not need to. The look Declan gave Adrian after he suggested the gala was brief, controlled, and hard as ice under black water. Adrian met it without blinking, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair, all polish and composure, as if he had not just stepped into a room at the exact wrong second and found something there he did not want to name. "The timing is bad," Declan said. "The timing is necessary," Adrian replied. "You have been off the public floor since Velvet House. People are talking. They smell blood when a strong man disappears." "They smell opportunity," Declan corrected. "Exactly." Clara sat still, bourbon warming slowly in her hand. The firelight moved over the glass, over the ledgers, over the faces of 2 men who knew each other too well to need raised voices. Adrian turned toward her with that same careful civility he wore like pressed silk. "Your presence would settle some of the noise. Half the city saw what happened that night. The woman who shielded Declan's children has already become a story. If you appear beside him, the message is simple. You are under protection, untouchable, or more visible," Clara said. "Visibility and safety are often the same thing in our world." "I doubt that." A pause followed. Adrian's smile held, but only at the edges. Declan set his glass down. "I said the timing is bad, and I said it is necessary." This time the chill in Adrian's tone was small but real. Clara heard it. Declan did too. Then as quickly as it came, Adrian's smoothness returned. "Think on it," he said. "The guest list is final tomorrow." He inclined his head once and left the library. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, neither Clara nor Declan spoke. The rain struck the windows with a steadier rhythm, now less violent than before, almost hypnotic. The fire settled lower in the grate. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked and then went still again. Clara looked down into her glass. He was listening before he opened that door. Declan did not deny it. "You knew." "Yes, and you still keep him this close." His gaze stayed on the closed door. "Clothesmen are easier to watch, not if they're the ones picking the locks." That drew his attention back to her. He studied her for one long second, not offended, not surprised, simply taking the sentence apart and fitting it into the pattern he was already building in his head. "You want my honest answer," he said at last. "I don't know yet if Adrian is disloyal, greedy, careless, or all three. But if someone inside my circle is moving pieces behind my back, I need proof before I cut the wrong hand off the board." Clara set her glass down. "Your children nearly died." His face changed then, and she saw something beneath the restraint that almost made her regret saying it aloud. Not because she was wrong, because she was right in a place he had no skin left. "I know exactly how close they came," he said quietly. The room went still between them. Clara should have let it go. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Do you sleep at all?" His mouth shifted, not amusement, not bitterness, something between them. Poorly. That wasn't really an answer. It was the complete answer. She held his gaze. "I hear footsteps outside my room around 2 every morning." Declan said nothing, and last night she continued softly. "I heard the handle turn. A beat, then another." When he finally spoke, his voice had gone low. "You were running a fever." "That is not an explanation." "No," he said. "It's a confession." Something in Clara's chest tightened and then spread warm in a way she did not trust. She looked away, first toward the rain on the glass, toward the black Atlantic far below. Anything but the man standing 3 feet from her with his tie loose and his control slipping at the edges in ways he probably hated. He moved around the desk and gathered the folders into a neat stack, more to occupy his hands than from any need for order. "You should get some sleep," he said. "That also sounds like a confession." This time he did smile briefly, and because it came so unexpectedly, it hit her harder than if he had leaned in and kissed her. It made him look younger, not gentler, just less armored. Like whatever face he had worn before grief and blood and power had hardened him was still somewhere inside reach if the right hand touched the right place. The smile vanished almost at once. He picked up his glass. "I'll speak to Adrian in the morning. About the gala. About everything." Clara rose carefully from the chair, already feeling the pull in her side where the healing wound reminded her she was still new to standing for too long. "And what do you want me to do?" Declan's eyes came back to her. "Nothing yet. You keep saying that like I'm ornamental." "No," he said. "I say it because every time you decide to help somebody starts bleeding." She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she crossed to the door slower now that the bourbon and the hour had taken a little of the strength from her legs. When she passed him, she felt his hand close lightly around her wrist. Not enough to stop her. Enough to make her stop anyway. The contact lasted 1 second, maybe 2. His thumb brushed the pulse there. Then he let go. "Good night, Clara." Her throat felt unexpectedly dry. "Good night, Declan." She made it to the hall before realizing it was the first time he had ever said her name without distance wrapped around it. The next 2 days passed under a strange taut quiet. Not calm, quiet. The kind that settles over a house when everyone feels weather shifting, but no one can yet point to the clouds. Clara kept working in the library, partly because she wanted the ledgers finished, partly because numbers gave her something solid when instinct kept whispering that the ground inside the estate was less steady than it looked. She found another discrepancy in one of the donor branches tied to the Cane family foundation. This one was smaller, almost careful enough to pass as an error. That made it worse. Not greed, testing. Someone was seeing how much they could move without tripping an alarm. When she showed Declan, he read the page once and handed it back without speaking. The silence did not bother her anymore. She was beginning to learn that his silences came in different kinds. This one was not dismissal. It was calculation. At lunch on Thursday, the twins found her in the conservatory with a notebook open beside a cup of tea gone cold. The conservatory was the only room in the house that felt openly warm. Glass walls, winter palms climbing ivy, a tiled floor that held the last of the afternoon sun. Mrs. Lang kept herbs there for the kitchen, and someone had tucked 2 small armchairs beside the fountain at the far end, as if even a fortress needed one room where people could breathe without strategy. Ella carried Bunny under one arm. Evan had Turbo in his back pocket and jam on his cheek. "You're hiding," Evan announced. "I'm working." "That's sadder." Clara looked up at him. "You are 5 and already impossible." "That's what Gabe says." "I'm standing right here," Gabe muttered from the door. He had become a permanent weather system in Clara's life. Present protective, mildly irritated by all human feeling, and somehow dependable enough that she no longer heard his footsteps until he spoke. Ella climbed into the chair across from Clara and folded one leg beneath herself. "Mrs. Lang says there's a party." "There is. Do you have to go?" The question came out quieter than Clara expected. She looked at Ella carefully. "Why do you ask?" The little girl's fingers tightened around Bunny's ear. "Because parties make Daddy colder too." Children saw everything, not the politics or the danger or the money-changing hands behind soft music and pretty flowers, but the aftermath. The tightened jaw, the late nights, the way their father's voice sharpened after rooms full of smiling adults. Clara closed the notebook. "I haven't decided." "Yes, you have," Gabe said from the doorway. She turned. "Have I?" Boss had Mrs. Lang pull gowns from 3 stores and a designer in Back Bay. "That is not deciding. That is intimidation." "It can be both." Evan gasped. "You get a gown." Clara pressed a hand to her heart. "I was hoping for chainmail." "That would actually be cool," he said. Ella thought about it. "Blue chainmail." "No, the gown." Clara blinked, then smiled. "You've decided too." Ella shrugged with all the solemn authority of a tiny queen. "Blue is less angry than red." That stayed with Clara. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Lang appeared outside Clara's room with 2 garment bags over one arm and an expression suggesting objections would be treated as background noise. "I am not doing this." "You are." "I do not need a dress to sit beside a dangerous man and smile at strangers." Mrs. Lang entered anyway and spread the dresses across the bed. One was deep midnight blue silk, clean lines, elegant, impossible. The other was a dark green velvet that looked like it belonged in candlelight and old money and nowhere near Clara Bennett's old life. She touched neither. Mrs. Lang saw that and softened just slightly. "This is not about pretending to be someone else," she said. "It is about making sure no one mistakes you for someone they can diminish." Clara looked at the dresses again. "That sounds expensive." It is also true. By evening, she had tried on both. The green was beautiful. The blue was dangerous. It skimmed close through the waist, left her shoulders bare, and made the scar near her collarbone look less like damage and more like a line someone had traced there on purpose. She stood in front of the mirror too long, not recognizing herself, then recognizing herself and finding that stranger somehow worse. A knock came at the half-open door. Declan stopped in the doorway. He had clearly come to say something practical. Perhaps about departure times or security or the fact that half of Boston's power structure would be in one ballroom the following night. Whatever it was left him the second he saw her. Clara looked at him through the mirror. His expression did not change much. He was too disciplined for that. But she watched the stillness settle into him the way it did when something hit harder than expected. "Well," she said lightly because the silence had started to pulse. "The room appears to have survived." He took one step in, then another. "You chose blue." "Actually, your daughter chose blue." "That tracks." She said it was less angry than red. For one brief moment, something almost humanly helpless crossed his face. It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it if she had not been looking straight at him. "Ella is often right about things no child should have words for," he said. His gaze drifted to the scar near her collarbone and held there one heartbeat too long. Clara's pulse answered before she could tell it not to. "The dress works," he said. Such poetry. He came to stand just behind her, not touching both of them reflected in the tall mirror. She could see the contrast all at once. His black suit stripped of its jacket, for the moment white shirt open at the throat. Her bare shoulders, the dark blue silk. The room around them warm with low lamplight and sea wind tapping faintly at the windows. They looked like the kind of trouble people invented stories about. His voice lowered. "I was trying not to say exactly what I thought. That sounds suspiciously like restraint." "It is." Clara met his eyes in the mirror. And what would the unrestrained version be? Declan did not answer immediately. When he did, it was quiet enough to feel private. That every man in that ballroom is going to look at you, and I already dislike it. The honesty of it stole the air from the room. Clara turned slowly to face him. That sounds possessive. It sounds honest. You barely trust yourself around honesty. No, he said. I barely trust myself around you. For one suspended instant, neither of them moved. Then footsteps approached in the hall, and the moment broke cleanly like glass under pressure. Mrs. Lang appeared with a jewelry case and stopped short. My timing continues to be impeccable in the most inconvenient ways, she murmured. Declan stepped back first. The room cooled with the distance, though not enough. Mrs. Lang opened the case on the dresser. Inside lay a small diamond pendant on a fine platinum chain. Simple, sharp, expensive in the understated way that told people real money had never needed to shout. Clara shook her head immediately. No, it is not a gift, Declan said. That makes it somehow less alarming. He lifted the necklace from the velvet lining. There's a panic trigger beneath the stone. Press it once and Gabe comes to you. Press it twice and half the house probably burns down around whoever is near you. Mrs. Lang gave him a look. That is not a comforting sales pitch. It is accurate. Clara stared at the pendant. You think I need this? I know you do. He stepped closer and waited. Some stubborn instinct in her wanted to resist, not because the necklace frightened her, but because accepting protection from a man like him always came with the danger of accepting everything that stood behind it. Then she turned and lifted her hair aside. Declan fastened the chain with careful fingers. The touch of his knuckles at the back of her neck was brief. Her entire body felt it. When she lowered her hair again, the pendant settled cool against her skin, resting just above the line of the scar. In the mirror, it looked less like jewelry than a promise, or a warning. The gala arrived under a cold, clear sky. Boston shone in winter light that made everything seem sharper, more unforgiving. Harbor water cut silver between stone and steel. Traffic moved slowly through downtown. The air outside the estate smelled of salt and distant snow. From early afternoon onward, the house shifted into a different kind of operation. Security teams rotated. Calls came in clipped bursts. Gabe oversaw vehicle assignments with the grim focus of a man planning military movement rather than a charity appearance. Mrs. Lang kept everyone on schedule with the quiet terror of true authority. The twins were scrubbed clean and dressed for dinner in clothes they hated and tolerated only because Clara promised to rescue them from formal shoes as soon as the adults left. Evan tugged on Declan's sleeve before departure. Do you have to go to the boring party? Yes. Do you have to take Clara? A beat of silence followed. Clara looked down to hide a smile. Declan crouched to his son's height. Yes. Because of danger, Declan's gaze flicked once toward Clara, then back to the boy. Because of several things. Ella appeared at Clara's side, silent as thought. Bring her back. The words landed harder than the child intended. Clara bent carefully and kissed the top of Ella's hair. I plan to. Ella accepted that with a nod, then fixed Declan with a stare far too old for her face. And no getting colder. A strange sound left him something between a breath and a laugh. I'll do my best. The drive into the city passed in near silence. Clara sat in the back of the armored sedan beside Declan, the dark blue silk pooling around her knees, the pendant cool against her throat. Beyond the tinted glass, Boston moved by in flashes of winter brick lamplight, old church towers, and slick pavement still holding the memory of last week's rain. She could feel the tension in him even when he said nothing. It lived in the set of his shoulders, in the stillness of his hands, in the way his eyes tracked reflections in the window without appearing to look. You hate this already, she said softly. He turned toward her. I hate rooms where everyone is armed, smiling, and pretending only one of those things is true. That is unreasonably poetic for a man in a black suit. Don't get used to it. A small smile touched her mouth. Too late. His gaze dropped there and remained just long enough to make her pulse trip before he looked away. The Ashcroft Grand rose over the harbor like old money given marble and gold leaf. Valets moved beneath the entrance awning in the cold. Security stood discreetly at every door. Inside, the lobby glittered with polished stone, towering arrangements of winter roses, and the kind of wealth that wanted to be admired for its restraint while costing more than most neighborhoods. When Declan stepped from the car and turned to offer Clara his hand, the night seemed to narrow around that single gesture. She took it. His palm was warm. The ballroom doors opened. Conversation inside dimmed, not fully, never so obviously, but enough to feel. Heads turned. Men paused mid-sentence. Women glanced over champagne flutes and instantly lowered their voices to share what they thought they knew. Clara felt the weight of it all settle over her skin like a second gown. Whispers followed them across the room. That's her. The waitress. The woman from Velvet House. She doesn't look like a waitress. Clara kept her face composed, her posture steady, and her hand lightly looped through Declan's arm. He introduced her simply as Clara. No last name, no explanation, no permission for questions. And every person who understood power understood the message. Mine to protect, not yours to touch. Music drifted low beneath the crystal chandeliers. Servers moved through the crowd with silver trays. Cameras flashed near the donor wall. Politicians, judges, developers, and polished men with beautiful wives and ugly bank histories smiled under soft gold light as if all the rot in the city had been checked at the coat room with their umbrellas. Clara had waited tables for enough powerful people to know the performance. The trick was simple. Look calm. Speak little. Notice everything. A state senator's wife commented on the pendant and pretended not to inspect the scar beneath it. A reporter attempted a light joke about unexpected company. Clara smiled and gave him nothing. One retired judge asked if she had family in the city. She answered, "Not anymore," and watched guilt close his mouth faster than rudeness ever could. Declan stayed beside her through all of it, not hovering, anchoring. Every now and then his hand would settle lightly at the small of her back to guide her past a knot of guests or turn her toward another conversation. Each touch was brief, practical, impossible to ignore. By the time they reached the far end of the ballroom near the marble columns overlooking the harbor, Clara had almost convinced herself the night might pass cleanly. Then Adrian appeared, perfect tuxedo, calm face, eyes already calculating. He approached with 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to Clara as if he had not been the coldest thing in the estate for the last week. "You've caused quite a stir," he said. Clara accepted the glass without drinking. "That sounds less like praise than diagnosis." "Observation," Adrian replied. His gaze shifted between her and Declan, taking in the closeness, the blue silk, the pendant at her throat, the fact that Declan had not once let her drift beyond reach all evening. For the first time, Clara saw something real break the surface of Adrian's composure. Not anger exactly, something meaner. Recognition. The music continued. Laughter rose from somewhere near the auction tables. Outside, the harbor lights trembled on black water. Inside, the ballroom still glittered as if money could make any room safe. But Clara felt it then with bone-deep certainty. The night had only grown quieter because danger had stepped close enough to stop shouting. The night had only grown quieter because danger had stepped close enough to stop shouting. Clara felt it before she could explain it. Not in the obvious things. Not the music, not the conversations. Not the soft clink of crystal and silver that kept gliding across the ballroom like the evening had not already sharpened around them. It was in the timing, in the way Adrian appeared only after she and Declan had settled into a rhythm, in the way he smiled just a little too smoothly when he looked at her, in the way Declan's shoulders went still beneath the tuxedo jacket instead of loosening. Adrian lifted his own champagne glass and glanced toward the far side of the room. "You've done exactly what we needed," he said. "Half the city has stopped whispering and started recalculating." "I'm thrilled to be useful," Clara replied. "You are more than useful," Adrian said. Declan's voice went cool, careful. Adrian looked back at him. "I only mean she changes the optics. You concern yourself with my optics too often." A thin pause followed. Then Adrian smiled again, lighter this time, all polished charm for anyone watching from a distance. "Only because people look to you first, cousin." The word landed wrong, not because of what it meant, because of how it was used, as if Adrian wanted to remind the room himself and Declan all at once that blood gave him the right to stand where he stood. Clara took the champagne and did not drink it. She had worked around enough men with soft voices and hard motives to know when a room had shifted from elegance into performance. Declan knew it too. She could feel his attention split, one part on the guests around them, the other on Adrian, the way a man watched a spark near dry timber. At the edge of the ballroom, Gabe stood where he had been all evening, broad as a doorway expression, unreadable eyes, moving without hurry. He gave Clara the faintest nod when he saw her glance his way. Stay put. Stay sharp. The message was clear enough even without words. A donor in pearls drifted over to greet Declan. Adrian used the interruption to step slightly back, and in that half-second Clara saw his face unguarded. There it was again, that same private coldness. Not anger, not even hatred. Certainty. The donor moved on. The orchestra shifted to a slower piece. Across the ballroom, a photographer adjusted position near the mayor. Someone laughed too loudly by the silent auction tables. The harbor glimmered black beyond the tall windows. Then Adrian leaned in, not to Clara, but to Declan, his tone pitched for one man only. "There's a problem upstairs." Declan turned his head. "What kind of problem?" "The Detroit people sent a man. He says he knows who brokered the Velvet House hit." Adrian's eyes flicked toward the mezzanine level and back. He refused to say it on the floor. Clara felt Declan tense beside her. It was not fear. It was calculation moving too fast. "Who is he?" "Luca Ferretti's nephew. He came alone. Says he'll wait 5 minutes and then he leaves." Declan did not answer at once. He glanced toward Gabe, then back toward the staircase, then down to Clara. She knew that look now. He was already taking the room apart in his head. Exits, lines of sight. Who had seen them? Who would notice if he vanished? How quickly he could be back. "Go," she said quietly. His gaze held hers. "You don't know what you're agreeing to. I know that standing here while you think about something else is worse." The corner of his mouth hardened. "You stay with Gabe." "I know." Declan looked at Adrian. 5 minutes. "Of course." Then he turned to Clara, fully, one hand settling at her waist, not for show now, but because he needed the contact before he let go. "Do not leave the ballroom." "That sounds familiar." "Take it seriously." "I am." His eyes searched hers one last time, and for one impossible heartbeat, the noise of the gala seemed to drop away. There was no orchestra, no cameras, no donors and traders and marble and chandeliers. Only the weight of his hand and the fear he tried to hide by pressing it into instructions. Then he stepped back. Adrian moved with him, polished and calm, guiding him toward the side staircase. Clara watched them go. Her chest tightened for no reason she could prove. No, that was not true. She had reasons, too many small ones. Adrian's timing, Adrian's eyes, Adrian wanting her here visible. Adrian listening outside doors, Adrian's name on paperwork that did not quite sit clean. She turned toward Gabe. He was no longer where he had been. For one sharp second, she thought the crowd had simply blocked him from sight. A cluster of donors moved past, laughing over something by the auction display. 2 waiters slipped between them with trays of champagne. A city councilman shifted aside, revealing empty floor where Gabe had stood. Clara's pulse kicked hard. She started toward the bar. A waiter carrying a tray of flutes cut across her path too quickly. He clipped her arm. Crystal tipped. Cold champagne splashed across the front of her blue dress. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, ma'am." The apology came fast, panicked, loud enough to draw eyes. The tray hit the floor in a burst of breaking glass. Guests stepped back. A woman gasped. Somebody laughed nervously. The sudden little scene opened a moving wall of bodies between Clara and the bar. She moved left to go around them. Another guest shifted into her way. Not by accident. Her hand rose instinctively to the pendant at her throat. A voice behind her said very softly, "I wouldn't do that yet." She froze. The hand that closed around her elbow was elegant, controlled, and strong enough to bruise. She turned. An older man in formal evening wear stood too close. Silver hair. A scar cutting clean through one eyebrow. Not hotel staff. Not charity elite. His face had the kind of hard age that came from surviving rooms where people solved problems with bullets and then called themselves businessmen by morning. Behind him stood Adrian. He did not bother smiling now. Clara's mouth went dry. "Where is Gabe?" "Temporarily occupied," Adrian said. Her eyes cut toward the staircase. "And Declan." Adrian's tone stayed gentle, almost bored. "He is currently in a private suite with a broken elevator and an empty room." Something cold and exact slid down Clara's spine. "You sent him there." I redirected him. "You set him up." Adrian took another step closer until the silver-haired man's grip and his own calm face boxed her in from both sides. Around them, the gala continued under soft gold light. Guests were already turning away from the champagne spill. The orchestra played on. She might as well have been invisible. "That depends on how poetic you want to be," Adrian said. "Your family." He laughed once, a sound with no warmth in it at all. "That word has cost me too much to still find it noble." Clara tried to pull free. The older man's hand tightened. She felt the cold muzzle of something hard pressed lightly into her side beneath the folds of her dress. Gun. No one around them noticed. Or worse, they noticed and looked away in the old instinctive manner of the powerful. This is not mine. This is not happening. I was never here. Clara forced her breathing to slow. Panic would only make her easier to move. Why me? Adrian's face changed then, not dramatically, just enough for the truth to show through. A crack in polish. A vein of bitterness under stone. Because he changed when you arrived. She stared at him. He was already slipping before that. Adrian continued, voice quiet, composed, deeply sincere, in the way dangerous men often are when speaking their own delusions. My sister died, and he stopped seeing the world clearly. He became sentimental around the children, hesitant in rooms where hesitation gets men buried. Then you appeared and he started looking at the door before he looked at the knife. He loves his children, and that is exactly the problem. The silver-haired man shifted the pressure of the gun against her ribs. Move, Adrian went on as if they were discussing donor strategy over drinks. If you disappear tonight, there will be only one story worth telling. A woman under Declan Cane's protection taken from a neutral ballroom. He'll blame Detroit. Detroit will retaliate whether they're guilty or not. The city tears itself apart. In the chaos, men who can no longer lead become replaceable. The simplicity of it made her sick. You want a war? I want order, Adrian said. And order requires a man who remembers what weakness costs. By murdering a woman, a faint shrug. By removing a distraction. The words landed harder than the gun, because they were so clean, so finished. Not anger, not impulse. A conclusion reached, justified, rehearsed. The silver-haired man jerked his head toward the service corridor. Now, Clara let them steer her, not because she had given up. Because fighting in the center of the ballroom with a gun at her side and no line of sight to Gabe would get her shot before anyone even understood the sound. She needed space, noise, heat, something messy enough to break their control. The kitchen. As they crossed the service threshold, the ballroom vanished behind swinging doors. The world changed instantly. White tile, steel counters, steam, orders shouted over burners, cooks moving fast with pans and knives and trays. It was all too bright after the gold hush outside. No one looked closely enough at first. A woman in a blue dress between two men in formal wear. Could be a guest who took the wrong door. Could be a donor needing air, could be none of their business. Keep walking, the older man muttered. The muzzle dug harder into her ribs. Adrian moved ahead, clearing a line toward the back loading area with the ease of a man who had already mapped the path. Of course he had. Clara's mind raced. The kitchen was crowded, loud, full of heat and motion. Better than the ballroom. Not enough yet. She needed a break in their attention, one good half-second, and something she could turn into violence before they turned theirs into finality. They passed a prep station stacked with sheet pans, a dishwasher hauling racks of glass to one side, a cooling table where a stockpot sat steaming fresh from a burner with the handle angled outward. There, quiet, the older man said into her ear. One sound and I put you down right here. Clara looked at the loading dock doors ahead. Cold night pressed against the narrow glass panel in them. Beyond that, she could make out headlights idling in the dark. A van. They were not improvising. They had planned every second down to the car. That realization did something useful to her fear. It sharpened it, burned off the helpless part, and left only motion. At the threshold to the loading area, Adrian reached for the metal handle. Get in the van, he said without turning. This can still stay clean. Clara thought of Ella saying bring her back. She thought of Evan's small hand wrapped around Turbo. She thought of Declan in the library telling her every time she chose to help somebody started bleeding. Fine, she could live with that. She moved all at once, not away from the older man, into him. Her heel came down with all her weight on the top of his polished shoe. Bone and pressure met. He swore and jerked instinctively. The gun wavered. Clara twisted hard, trapped his wrist against her hip, and seized the stockpot with her free hand. Boiling broth exploded through the loading area in a white burst of steam and heat. The older man screamed. Adrian recoiled too late. The liquid splashed across his sleeve, his neck, the side of his face. Not enough to cripple him, enough to blind him for one crucial second and strip away his composure. The gun fired. The shot punched into the ceiling with a crack that silenced half the kitchen. Then the room came apart. Gun. Clara screamed. "He has a gun!" She ran, not toward the dock, back inside. That was the choice that saved her. If she had gone for the street, they would have had the dark and the van and too many ways to erase one woman. Inside, there were witnesses, obstacles, chaos. Inside, noise might become a weapon. Cooks shouted and ducked aside. A sauté pan crashed to the floor. Someone yelled for security. Someone else froze in pure animal disbelief as the older man stumbled after Clara, clutching his burned hand, the gun now visible to everyone. Adrian's voice ripped through the kitchen, no longer polished, no longer patient. "Don't let her reach the ballroom." Clara hit the swinging doors at a dead run and burst back into gold light and music and a room full of powerful people who had spent their entire lives pretending violence happened somewhere else. The orchestra stopped on a snapped note. Conversation died. All eyes turned. Clara stood in the doorway, breathing hard, hair half fallen loose. Blue silk, darkened by champagne and kitchen water. Eyes wide with the kind of fear no one in that room could mistake for theater. At the far end of this ballroom, the side staircase doors flew open. Declan, he had already known. Maybe the empty room upstairs told him. Maybe the broken elevator. Maybe the man waiting for him had never shown, and all the carefully arranged pieces suddenly clicked into place. Whatever the reason, he hit the top landing with a look on his face that made half the room instinctively step back, though he was 20 yards away. His eyes found Clara first, then Adrian behind her, then the gun. Everything after that moved with the speed of a car crash. Down Declan roared. Clara dropped. The first shot went over her and shattered a champagne tower into glittering ruin. Guests screamed. A chandelier rained crystal as bullets tore through hanging glass and marble columns sent echoes hammering across the room. The ballroom dissolved. People dove under tables. Security rushed in from every door. Women in couture flattened themselves against walls beside men who had spent fortunes pretending to be respectable. A politician fell on the auction display and sent silver serving pieces skidding across the floor. The older man aimed again. A dark shape slammed into him from the side so violently both men crashed through a service cart. Gabe, blood streaked one side of his forehead. His tuxedo jacket hung torn at the shoulder. He must have fought his way out of wherever they had put him, and he came through the gunman like a wrecking ball through drywall. Declan did not have a visible weapon. He did not need one. As he vaulted the last steps, he ripped a silver steak knife from an overturned table, the polished blade flashing once in the ballroom light. He landed hard, rolled through broken glass, and came up moving. Adrian backed toward a stone pillar, pistol in hand, now face slick with stock and fury. Guests shrank away from him. His mask was gone. No charm, no cousin's ease, no civilized restraint. Only a man who had finally been forced into the open. "It should have been me," he shouted. The words cut through the chaos because they were not meant for the room. They were meant for one man only. "I kept this family standing while you buried yourself." Adrian spat. "I handled the ports, the judges, the money, the alliances. I cleaned every mess while you played widower and father." Declan kept walking. He did not raise his voice. That made him terrifying. "You betrayed my children." Adrian's hand shook around the gun. "You were losing the nerve to protect what matters." "What matters," Declan said, "is exactly what you tried to kill." Clara had pushed herself onto one elbow, hidden partly behind an overturned chair. Her pulse roared in her ears. She could see Gabe and the older man on the floor near the service entrance, fists and knees and blood and gunmetal in a blur of brutal motion. She could smell powder wine smoke from shattered sconces and the metallic edge of fear from a room full of people who had never expected truth to show up armed. Adrian fired. The bullet grazed Declan's upper arm and tore the sleeve clean open. He did not slow, not even a little. That was the moment fear truly broke Adrian's face. Not when the plan failed, not when Clara escaped. Here, watching a wounded man keep coming with murder in his eyes and purpose in every step. He fired again. Click! The chamber jammed. For one absurd second, Adrian stared down at the weapon like betrayal had somehow reached him too. Then Declan was on him. He hit Adrian hard enough to drive the breath out of both men. The knife clattered away across marble forgotten. Declan seized him by the front of the tuxedo and slammed him backward into the pillar with a crack that made the nearest guests flinch as one. "I gave you my house," Declan said. He drove him into the stone again. "I gave you my trust." Again, "I buried your sister." Adrian gasped, tried to swing, missed. Blood ran from his mouth, now thin and dark against his teeth. She chose weakness, too. The sentence had barely left him when the room itself seemed to contract. Declan went still, not calm. Still in the way a storm goes, still just before the roof lifts off. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped so low Clara almost did not hear it. "You do not say her name to me now." Adrian laughed once through the blood. It sounded broken. "You were never meant to survive tenderness." "No," Declan said. "You weren't." He could have killed him there. Everyone in the ballroom knew it. Clara knew it. Adrian knew it. She saw it in the line of Declan's body, in the fist twisted in Adrian's jacket, in the white heat pouring off him like something physical. One movement, one harder impact, one turn of the wrist, and this ended in public blood. But the room was full of witnesses, judges, reporters, donors, men who traded influence like chips and would spend years feeding on whatever happened next. Declan knew that too. His restraint was not mercy. It was choice under fire. He pulled Adrian forward just enough to look him in the eye. "Family was the only reason you still drew breath in my house." Then he struck him once fast and clean the heel of his hand, driving into the side of Adrian's head with surgical force. Adrian dropped, unconscious before he hit the floor. Silence followed. Not complete silence. Too many people still crying, gasping, moving, calling for security. But the center of the room went strangely still. The duel was over. Everyone felt it at once. Sirens wailed outside, faint at first, then closer. Gabe hauled the older gunman upright near the service door. One massive hand locked in the back of the man's collar while the other twisted his burned wrist until the pistol clattered uselessly to the floor. Gabe's face was bleeding. His expression remained exactly as irritated as if this had merely interrupted dessert. "Cops 2 minutes," he barked. Declan turned. He looked for Clara. Found her. The change in him happened too fast to fully see. 1 second executioner, the next, something far more dangerous because it was vulnerable. He crossed the wrecked floor in long, hard strides and dropped to his knees beside her. "Look at me." She did. His hands framed her face, moved down her arms, checked her throat, her shoulders, the line of her ribs where the gun had been pressed. His fingers were shaking. He was furious enough to tear walls down and terrified enough that the anger had nowhere to settle. "I'm okay," Clara said, though her voice came out thinner than she wanted. His stare cut straight through the words. "Do not say that, unless it's true." A laugh almost broke out of her anyway. It would have been absurd in any other room. Not this one. Not with Crystal under her palms and police sirens getting louder and his blood on one cuff and someone else's on his collar. "It's true enough," she whispered. There was a cut at her temple from where a glass shard had caught her near the doors. Declan saw it, and his thumb brushed the blood away with a care that should have been impossible on those hands. "Did he hurt you? Number? Did he touch you?" Clara held his gaze, only enough to fail. Something bleak and relieved crossed his face all at once. Then she said, because there was still one thing that mattered more than either of them admitting how close this had come. It was him. "I know. He wanted a war. I know." The words shook out of her before she could stop them. "I saw it too late." Declan's expression changed, not softer, deeper. He leaned in forehead, almost touching hers, though he stopped just shy of the contact, as if he still needed one final proof that she was here and breathing before he let himself have even that. "No," he said, voice rough now, stripped of all polish, all command. "You survived it." The pendant at her throat felt cold, suddenly absurdly cold against skin gone hot with adrenaline. Declan's hand covered it for 1 second, as if checking that it was still there, that she was still there. Then Gabe's voice cut across the room again. "We need to move." Declan rose and pulled Clara to her feet in one smooth motion. She swayed. His arm tightened around her waist before she could pretend she had not. "I can walk." "Not tonight." Before she could argue, he lifted her. The ballroom gave a collective intake of breath, not because a man was carrying a woman, because of who he was when he did it. Boston's most feared crime boss tuxedo torn, arm bleeding, carrying a woman in a blue gown through a room full of people who had just watched his family split open. No one spoke. No one dared. Clara wrapped one arm around his neck because there was no graceful way to do anything else. Up close, she could smell smoke-expensive cologne, the ocean still trapped in his coat, and the live electric edge of a man holding himself together by force alone. He glanced down at her once as he carried her past broken glass and overturned chairs. "I told you not to leave the ballroom." Despite everything, she let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Technically, I came back to it." His mouth nearly moved. Gabe shoved open a side exit with his shoulder dragging the older gunman behind him. Security surged around them in a dark, moving wall. Somewhere behind, hotel staff shouted over one another. Somewhere closer, a woman was crying. Police lights painted the marble corridor blue and red through the long windows. The cold outside hit Clara's skin like a slap. Declan did not loosen his hold. The convoy of black vehicles was already pulling around the side entrance when they reached the curb. Doors opened. Men spoke in clipped bursts. Gabe shoved the prisoner into one SUV with all the tenderness of a man loading scrap metal. Declan lowered Clara into the back seat of the lead car and climbed in after her. The door slammed. The city vanished behind armored glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The engine roared. Tires bit wet pavement. Security vehicles peeled away behind them in a protective line. Only then, in the dark privacy of the moving car, did Declan let his head tip back against the seat and shut his eyes. Not to rest. To survive 1 second without being watched. Clara looked at him. The blood on his shirt had dried in one place and spread fresh in another, where the graze wound at his arm still seeped through torn fabric. His breathing was measured but not calm. His hand remained wrapped around hers with such force it bordered on desperate. She said his name. His eyes opened immediately. "I'm here," she whispered. The look he gave her then was not one she would ever mistake for anything less than ruin and relief meeting in the same place. He lifted her hand and pressed it hard against his chest. His heartbeat hammered beneath her palm. Wild, unhidden, human. Outside Boston slid past in cold streaks of light and river dark. Inside the car, between blood and silence and the wreckage of everything exposed that night, the truth sat with them both at last. Nothing between them would ever fit back into the shape it held before the ballroom doors burst open. Nothing between them would ever fit back into the shape it held before the ballroom doors burst open. By the time the convoy reached the estate, the night had settled into that strange hour when even the ocean sounded tired. The gates opened before the lead car fully slowed. Security spilled across the drive in dark suits and clipped voices. Mrs. Lang was already waiting at the front steps, robe thrown over her dress face, pale and composed in the way only truly competent people could manage during disaster. Declan stepped out first and came around for Clara before she could reach for the door handle. "I can walk," she said. "You said that last time too." There was no heat in it, only exhaustion and a kind of fierce care that had lost all patience for argument. She let him steady her as they climbed the steps. Inside the house glowed warm against the cold still trapped in her skin. Somewhere upstairs she heard a child's voice, thin with sleep and worry. "The twins." Clara turned her head at once. "They're awake." They heard the cars. Declan's jaw tightened. "Vale is waiting in the study. He checks you first." Mrs. Lang moved in beside them and pressed a folded cloth into Clara's hand for the cut near her temple. "The children are safe. Gabe already had the East Hall locked down before you came through the gates. You need not bleed through the foyer while proving your strength." Clara almost smiled. Almost. The study smelled of antiseptic whiskey and rain-damp wool. Dr. Vale arrived with his medical case and one sharp look that carried equal parts irritation and relief. "You make a dreadful habit of arriving dramatic," he muttered. "She is not dramatic," Declan said. "She is injured." Vale looked from one to the other and clearly decided he had no patience for either distinction. He cleaned the cut at Clara's temple, checked her ribs, her pulse, her pupils, the old wound in her side, and finally the bruise blooming dark where the gun had pressed into her. "No fracture," he said at last. "No fresh bullet holes. An excellent standard for this household." His gaze shifted to Declan's arm. "Now sit down before I sew your sleeve to your skin out of spite." Declan did not move. Declan, Clara said quietly. "That did it." He sat. Vale cleaned the graze at his upper arm, while Clara watched from the leather sofa. Her own pulse finally slowing enough to feel all the places fear had left behind. There was broken glass still in the hem of her dress. Her shoulders ached. Her throat felt scraped raw from smoke and shouting. Yet none of that pressed on her as hard as the simple fact that Adrian had looked her in the face and called her a distraction, and that somewhere beneath all the planning and betrayal had sat one terrible truth. He had been close enough to destroy them because Declan had loved him once. When Vale finished, the room fell quiet. Mrs. Lang stepped inside without knocking. "The children are refusing to sleep." Declan stood immediately. Clara rose too. "I'm coming." No one stopped her. The nursery sitting room was dim except for the fire and one small lamp left burning near the bookshelf. Evan sat curled in the corner of the sofa with Turbo clutched to his chest. Ella stood at the window in her nightgown, Bunny hanging from one hand, staring down at the drive as if she had been willing the cars to return by force. When they saw Clara, both moved at once. Not running, not wild, something more fragile than that. Relief. Evan buried his face against her side and hugged as carefully as a child could while still holding on with everything he had. Ella wrapped both arms around Clara's waist and said nothing at all. Clara closed her eyes. "I'm here," she whispered into their hair. "I'm here." Declan remained near the doorway for a moment, watching. Then he crossed the room and crouched in front of his children. "It's over," he said. Ella looked at him with too much honesty for 5 years old. "You got colder." A breath left him. "Yes, and now?" He glanced up at Clara before answering. "Now I stop." Evan pulled back enough to inspect the bandage on Declan's arm. "Did you win?" Declan considered the question, then touched 2 fingers under his son's chin. "You are home. Your sister is home. Clara is home. That is enough." The twins accepted this with the solemn seriousness of children who had learned that safety was not a game adults always won cleanly. Mrs. Lang led them back toward bed a few minutes later, and this time they went without protest. At the door, Ella turned back. "Is Clara staying?" The room stilled. Declan did not answer first. He looked at Clara. Something in her chest softened and hurt at the same time. "Yes," she said. Ella nodded once, satisfied, and disappeared down the hall. The days after the gala unfolded with a quieter violence. Not bullets, decisions. Adrian vanished from the language of the house. His offices were emptied before noon the next day. The men loyal to him were stripped out one by one. Some escorted off Cane property, some detained, some simply gone by the time dawn became afternoon. Boston papers reported a disturbance at the Ashcroft Grand, then buried it under charity photos and polished statements about a private security incident. No one printed the real story. Clara did not ask for all the details. She knew enough to understand that Declan was cutting rot from the foundation with the same ruthless precision he brought to every threat. Enough to see the cost in his face at breakfast, in the way he stood longer than necessary outside the nursery doors at night, in the silences that now felt less guarded than worn thin. She stayed, not because danger had fully passed, not because the house had become simple, but because leaving would have been its own kind of lie. By early December, the first snow came to the coast. The estate changed with it. The stone terraces whitened. The sea turned iron gray beneath a pale sky. Inside, warmth gathered in corners that had felt formal before. The twins made paper stars in the conservatory. Mrs. Lang gave up trying to keep glitter confined to one room. Gabe developed a mysterious tolerance for small hands decorating his office with candy canes. Clara moved through it all with growing ease. She took over the charitable ledgers completely when Declan asked, and then when he did not ask. She rebuilt donor structures Adrian had used as cover and turned them into something clean enough to withstand scrutiny. She expanded emergency relief through the foundation in neighborhoods where predatory lending had gutted families like hers. The work mattered because it was real, and because Declan never once called it charity when it came to her. He called it authority. Some nights they ended up in the library after the house had gone quiet. Ledgers closed fire low. Both of them too tired to pretend the distance still belonged there. They talked then. Not about everything, not yet. But enough. About his late wife, beautiful and restless and never meant for a life built on constant danger. About the twins being born too close to grief. About Clara's father teaching her to braid bread dough with more patience than she had ever brought to people. About the smell of bakeries at dawn. About the way winter by the ocean made every house feel lonelier unless someone insisted on filling it with noise. And slowly, as if the house itself had been waiting for permission, the loneliness eased. On Christmas Eve, the great room glowed with lights and pine and the sweet mess of children who had opened too many presents before breakfast. Evan wore one sock and no concern. Ella sat cross-legged beneath the tree arranging ribbons into neat piles because she liked order where she could find it. Snow drifted past the tall windows in soft white sheets. Clara stood by the fire in a cream sweater watching the twins argue over whether Turbo qualified as holiday formal wear. Declan came in carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. He handed one to her and remained there a moment, close enough for the heat from his shoulder to reach her before he spoke. "The last of Adrian's men are gone." Clara looked up at him. "Gone where?" "Out of my house, out of my city if they're smart." She held his gaze. "And you?" He understood the real question at once. "I'm still here," he said. Then after a beat, "If you are." The twins had gone suddenly quiet. Too quiet. Clara glanced over and found both of them watching with bright, shameless concentration from the rug. Evan was practically vibrating. Ella looked smug in a way no child should have mastered so early. Declan followed Clara's gaze and let out one tired breath that sounded suspiciously like surrender. Then he reached into his pocket and drew out a small leather box. Not new, not flashy, worn at the corners as if it had waited through more than one season for the right hand to open it. Clara's heart stumbled once hard. He set his mug aside and took her free hand. For the first time since she had known him, Declan Cane looked uncertain, not weak, human. "You walked into my life carrying a tray of water," he said quietly. "Then you bled for my children before I even knew your last name." His thumb moved over her knuckles. "Since then you have done something no one else has managed in years. You made this house feel like a place where people could live, not just survive." Clara could not look away. "I do not need a symbol," he said. "I do not need a woman at my side to make me appear softer than I am. I need you. On the hard days, in the quiet rooms, in every winter that comes after this one." He opened the box. A sapphire ring caught the firelight deep blue, surrounded by small diamonds, elegant enough to feel timeless. "Clara Bennett," he said, voice lower now, rougher around the edges. "Will you marry me?" Her eyes burned before she could stop them. She looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the twins under the tree trying and failing not to hold their breath. Then she smiled through the tears. "Yes," Evan shouted first. Ella closed her eyes as if relieved the adults had finally caught up to the obvious. Declan slid the ring onto Clara's finger with hands steadier than they had been the night he carried her through blood and broken glass. When he kissed her, it was not possession. It was gratitude, relief, promise. Outside, snow kept falling over the cliffs, the roads, the sleeping city beyond. Inside, in the house that had once been built like a fortress, warmth finally stopped feeling temporary.